Learning to tap into my instincts didn't happen because I suddenly became wiser. It happened because I spent years ignoring them and paying the price. Nobody wakes up planning to ruin their life. We drift off course through small, consistent choices that don't align with who we truly want to be. Instincts whisper long before life collapses, but ignoring them becomes easier with time. I eventually looked at my life and realized how many decisions felt wrong. My body had been signaling misalignment for years, yet I pushed those feelings aside without understanding why everything felt so persistently off. What surprised me most was that I didn't need a detailed plan of the person I wanted to become. My instincts already knew. Every time I acted against my values, a wave of discomfort would rise. But because I didn't understand the root cause, I blamed myself. Many struggles I faced weren't my fault. I simply didn't have the knowledge to interpret what was happening inside me. For decades, I carried anxiety that I thought was emotional weakness, never realized it was a symptom of something deeper and more neurological. That misunderstanding shaped so much of my life. I didn't learn I had ADHD until I was 47. For most of my adult life, anxiety and overwhelm followed me everywhere. Later, I discovered this wasn't just from stress, but also from repressed trauma I didn't remember until my late 20s. The body keeps score, and mine carried memories I had long forgotten. That trauma, paired with undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia, created constant internal chaos. I couldn't understand why I struggled with things that seemed effortless for others. Instead of recognizing neurological differences, I convinced myself something was wrong with me, fueling years of confusion and self-blame. Growing up in the 1970s, girls like me were rarely evaluated for ADHD or learning differences. Research focused almost entirely on boys, and because boys and girls express these issues differently, girls were overlooked. Boys with ADHD are often fidgety, disruptive, or impulsive, making their struggles visible. Girls internalize. We become withdrawn, overly reflective, self-critical, and anxious. Teachers saw us as quiet, not struggling. So instead of accurate diagnoses, many girls were told they had anxiety or emotional issues. A whole generation grew into adulthood misdiagnosed, misunderstood, and unsupported, believing something was wrong with their character instead of their neurology. The truth is, kids with undiagnosed learning differences walk into classrooms every day knowing they can't keep up. That uncertainty fuels chronic anxiety. They don't misbehave because they're careless. They do it because their nervous system is overwhelmed. I was one of those kids. I spent decades battling anxiety without knowing the real cause. I was medicated for almost 20 years on Zoloft, which helped stabilize me, but never addressed the underlying issues. I didn't know the truth, so I couldn't understand why I still struggled. Misdiagnosis didn't just affect my mental health. It shaped my entire self-perception. Things worsened when I became pregnant with my first daughter. I had to stop medication, and the combination of pregnancy, unresolved trauma, and untreated ADHD pushed me into a severe mental health crisis. The birth experience was traumatic, leaving me terrified and overwhelmed. I developed intense postpartum anxiety and depression. Doctors prescribed medication strong enough to keep me numb so that I wouldn't harm myself or the baby. For a period, I couldn't be left alone. Family and friends took turns staying with me. Those months were terrifying, a dark fog that consumed everything. But even then, something in me kept surviving. Ironically, women often discover their own ADHD only after their children are evaluated. That's exactly how it happened for me. Our son reached 4th grade and struggled daily, interrupting class, unable to focus, overwhelmed with anxiety. Teachers labeled him a problem. We sought a specialist outside the school system and finally received answers: dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. Suddenly, everything made sense. My heart broke thinking of the countless children who never get evaluated because they lack resources. They get labeled difficult, lazy, or disruptive when they're actually working harder than anyone else in the room just to keep up. Understanding my son changed everything. His diagnosis wasn't a label, it was a roadmap. It helped us support his brain instead of blaming him for things he couldn't control. When I told his pediatrician how similar his symptoms sounded to mine, he immediately confirmed it. saying I was the most ADHD parent he worked with. He listed behaviors I never realized were signs: missing appointments, last-minute panics, forgetting forms, racing through life. Hearing it so directly was both shocking and comforting. For the first time, I felt seen instead of confused. It opened a door to understanding myself more deeply. I've been wrestling with this idea for a long time, and every attempt I make brings me back to the same realization. These thoughts are really just notes to myself disguised as insights. They're reminders I keep circling around. Try to articulate with more honesty each time. What fascinates me most is how certain concepts follow us through life, revealing themselves in different forms until we're finally ready to understand them. This idea, in particular, keeps returning with a strange persistence, as if it refuses to let me ignore it any longer. Viktor Frankl once said that when a person cannot find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. His point wasn't to judge pleasure, but to highlight how easily we fill our lives with surface-level comforts when something essential feels missing. It's easier to chase temporary highs and confront the emptiness underneath. Many people fall into this pattern without realizing it. They drift from distraction to distraction, hoping the next one will offer relief. Yet the real issue often isn't boredom or desire. It's that they've lost connection with purpose. But there's another group whose struggle looks entirely different. Instead of using pleasure to escape the absence of meaning, they use meaning to escape the absence of pleasure. This is what I think of as Frankl's inverse law. When someone doesn't naturally feel joy, ease, or simple contentment, they sometimes bypass pleasure altogether. They anchor themselves in difficult pursuits, noble goals, achievements, seriousness, anything that feels weighty enough to substitute for happiness they rarely experience. For these people, doing hard things becomes a way of life. They excel at delayed gratification, almost to a fault. They turn restraint into a personality trait and discipline into a shield. If joy doesn't come easily, they tell themselves they don't need it. They seek meaning in everything because meaning feels attainable, whereas happiness feels slippery. Over time, they become champions of endurance, convincing themselves that sacrifice is virtuous simply because it's familiar. The problem is that endless delayed gratification eventually becomes no gratification. You train yourself to always wait, always push, always postpone the very things you claim to be working toward. It's like preparing forever for a moment you never allow yourself to experience. Alan Watts once warned that in trying too hard to improve our lives, we forget to actually live them. When everything becomes a stepping stone to something else, life starts feeling like an endless rehearsal with no performance. We're taught that things worth having are hard to attain, and often that's true, but difficulty alone doesn't equal value. This belief sneaks pointless struggles into our lives because we assume that if something is challenging, it must also be meaningful. In reality, doing something well doesn't make it important. Many people become hyper-responders to the advice to work hard, turning productivity into identity and ambition into obligation. From the outside, these high achievers look admirable, disciplined, focused, unshakable. But behind the image often sits someone who can't feel joy easily, someone who uses work to avoid confronting the absence of happiness. They promise themselves that satisfaction will come tomorrow, after the next achievement, the next milestone, the next sacrifice. But tomorrow keeps moving, always just out of reach, like chasing a horizon that stays the same distance no matter how far you walk. Eventually, you end up sacrificing your joy as an offering to your work. You mistake seriousness for depth. You mistake exhaustion for dedication. You tell yourself that your intense, humorless devotion means you care deeply, but often it's just a coping mechanism. It's taking advice meant for people who struggle with discipline and turning it into a religion of overexertion. Henry David Thoreau said that the price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it. Many of us are depositing our time, energy, and attention into goals we never withdraw from. We save and save but never spend. We become so good at waiting for the right moment that the moment never comes. Mastering the marshmallow test to an extreme simply results in a life where you never eat the marshmallow at all. The fantasy is that all this sacrifice builds toward one glorious turning point that justifies everything. But in hindsight, many people realize they created a trail of achievements that fell hollow because they never paused to enjoy any of them. It becomes a collection of successes experienced through constant strain rather than presence. Life ends up looking like a series of moments prepared for, but never lived. This is why doing a little of what matters now is essential. You cannot keep postponing the things you care about until real life settles down. Duties never end. Responsibilities never fully disappear. If you wait for the perfect moment to write your book, pursue your passion, reconnect with loved ones, or simply have fun, you'll wait forever. At some point, the only option is to begin, imperfectly, inconveniently, but genuinely. These challenges don't exist in isolation. They pull against each other. The drive that fuels ambition can also hide insecurities. The desire for inspiration can mask the need for compassion. Discipline can empower you while simultaneously suffocating your ability to feel joy. Delayed gratification is valuable, but only to a point. For people who already excel at self-denial, the real challenge is learning to let themselves enjoy something now. This is why Frankl's inverse law resonates so strongly. When someone can't find a deep sense of pleasure, they compensate with meaning. It's easier to be serious than playful, easier to be productive than joyful. I've seen this in many friends who treat work as their natural state and leisure as something strange or unearned. For them, achieving feels familiar, relaxing feels foreign. In ancient Greek, the word for work literally meant not at leisure, implying that leisure was a default and work was the exception. But many people today experience the opposite. Work becomes the baseline. Leisure becomes the aberration. The idea that you must constantly push yourself becomes an identity, especially for anyone trying to escape difficult circumstances or build a life different from the one they were born into. To succeed, they create a relentless inner engine, a monster, in a sense, that drives them forward. And sometimes this is necessary. Determination can be transformative. But the danger is never turning that switch off, never releasing the tension, never letting yourself stop striving long enough to feel anything other than effort. It becomes a dose-response curve where both too little and too much harm you. Most things in life follow that curve. Not enough effort leads to stagnation, but too much effort leads to burnout. The sweet spot, the middle where life thrives, is harder to find than we admit. Overachievers constantly wonder whether they should push harder or ease up. If you routinely outperform everyone around you and still feel guilty taking a break, it's a sign that you may need to lift your foot off the gas, even if only a little. Learning when to stop is just as important as knowing when to start. Life doesn't reward constant tension. It rewards adaptability. The ability to shift gears, to work hard when needed and to rest when needed, determines more in the long run than endless striving. Many people fear that easing up means losing progress, but often it means regaining clarity and reconnecting with what matters. If you never allow yourself pleasure, happiness stops being part of your emotional vocabulary. Your life becomes optimized but not enjoyed. You mistake motion for meaning, productivity for fulfillment. In reality, meaning and happiness are not enemies. They rely on each other. Meaning without joy becomes heavy. Joy without meaning becomes hollow. A balanced life demands room for both. The truth is that fulfillment isn't waiting at the end of your efforts. It emerges in the moments you allow yourself to live. Not just work, not just strive, but actually be present. Joy isn't a reward you earn later. It's a capacity you cultivate now. And if it feels difficult at first, that's exactly why it matters. Learning to let life in is a skill, one that grows only through practice. At the end of all this reflection, the message becomes simple. Stop waiting for permission to enjoy the life you're building. Meaning is valuable. Achievement is valuable. Growth is valuable. But they were never meant to replace happiness. They were meant to enrich it. And if joy doesn't arrive naturally, that's not a failure. It's an invitation. An invitation to create space for pleasure now, even if it feels unfamiliar or undeserved. Life is not a test you pass by enduring the most discomfort. It's an experience meant to be lived, not accumulated. The goal isn't to escape work or abandon ambition, but to soften the edges of your effort, to let pleasure coexist with meaning, to allow joy to return, even in small moments, to remember that the horizon was never the destination. You were meant to enjoy the walk toward it.